Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. My name is Drew. If it's your first time here, that's a big welcome. We are learning functional anatomy. So what that means is we're studying how the body moves when muscles contract and they pull on bones and how the joints move. So this is functional anatomy. So there are kind of like a couple of levels to learning functional anatomy. So if you want to understand how the body moves, so in any form of exercise, doesn't matter what you're doing, it's all the same. Um, if you're a therapist, a personal trainer, yoga teacher, Pilates instructor, body worker, or even visual artist, and you still have a really keen interest in how the body works and how it moves. So what we need to basically do is you need a good understanding of the structure of the body. So that's the skeletal system or the framework, the muscles where they attach on the body. So when they contract, they pull on the actual bones themselves, and then the joints, so where the bones can meet together. And so typically what will happen is to create movement, one bone will stay fairly stable or still, and the other bone will be moved around it or across it. And that's how we kind of create movement. So to understand that, what we need to do is kind of like basically do what I call Legos. So you take them one building block at a time, one Lego block at a time, and then you understand each Lego, or in this case, each individual muscle or ligament or joint, and then you put them back together so they make a whole kind of picture. And today we are looking at this amazing muscle here called the transverse abdominis, or the TVA. This is your primary core stabilizing muscle. Okay, so we're going to have a bit of a look at what's going on with this muscle here. As always, we're using the app Complete Anatomy 3D for Medical. There will be a link in the description to the website. Really quite reasonable, subscription free, yearly. We're only looking at a couple of different elements of this today. As you can see, there's a lot more tools and things you can investigate and use to help with your learning. So I highly recommend you go and check out the app if you're interested in learning anatomy. So the first thing we do is we look at the origin and insertion. So to do that, you select a muscle and then come over to this section here, and you want to go to info. So we just click across here onto info. It'll give you the quick facts. So this is a good overview. It's going to give you like a nice rundown of the muscle. So the origin is the costal cartilage of the 7th and the 12th ribs. So the costal cartilage is this floating cartilage here. So if we look here, that's rib 12, 11, 10, 9, 8, 6, and 7. It's 5th. I miscounted. So 7th here, 8th, 9, 10. So kind of like the bottom third of your rib cage, and on the floating cartilage here. So this is cartilage that's really strong, tough connective tissue. It has some pliability to it. So that means that when you're breathing in and out, the rib cage can expand and contract a little bit because we've got this a little bit more pliability. It's not flexible like muscles flexible, but it has some give, so it allows that expansion and contraction, which is what we want for respiration or breathing, which I'm told is pretty helpful and pretty normal. Let me just have a sip of my chai. Chai is good. So we've got the rib cage, and essentially you will see it attaches from the front right around to the back onto that 12th rib there. One thing I always say is breathing is core work and core work is breathing, because all the abdominal muscles, all the core muscles attach to the rib cage, which means that when you inhale and exhale, they're going to have an effect on the abdominal muscles, the core muscles, and then vice versa. When the core muscles are contracting or relaxing, they're going to change position or shape or affect the ribs. So core training is breathing, and breathing is core training. So, and when you do a movement practice like yoga or Pilates, and you really concentrate on integrating breathing technique into your movements, it transforms them into being really functional. And in my observation, when people learn how to connect movement with their own unique breath and their own unique body, then they will start to move in a really functional and pain-free way if they stick to that kind of principle. If you try to go outside of your respiratory capacity and your biomechanical capacity and your stability capacity, that's often where injuries and dysfunction kind of arise from. So try to, when you're doing slower mindful movement practices like yoga, Tai Chi, Qigong, Pilates, functional mobility, weighted mobility, that kind of stuff, integrate it with breathing because it really makes it much more effective. So we're looking at the origin. So we've got the rib cage, we've got the thoracolumbar fascia. So I'll put that in here, just one side. So this whole region here, this big yellow triangle shape here, this is particularly the thoracolumbar fascia. And that fascial sheath kind of goes right, the back extensors on the posterior back line, if we're looking at anatomy trains, for example. So right up through here. So your TVA, your transverse abdominis, directly connects into your thoracolumbar fascia. Okay. Then we have the iliac crest and the inguinal ligament. So this whole kind of ridge here on the iliac or the ilium, so this green bone on the pelvis is the ilium, and this kind of ridge, well, this is the crest, kind of crest like top of the hill. So you can see like the attachment of the TVA is right on the inside of this pelvic bone here. So it's kind of coming right on the inside through here, right on the top, kind of like on the rim, if you will. Then it attaches onto the inguinal ligament, which is that strong ligament that goes from the anterior superior iliac spine, so the ASIS, onto the pubic symphysis here, which is your pubic bone just here. So that creates, there's a bit of a space in through here. Okay. And that goes right down, and it will attach onto the last aspect, which we haven't talked about yet, is the linea alba. So the linea alba is this line of connective tissue that comes right through the middle. So if you're looking for a structure, so if you go to Quick Facts and you say, oh, here's linea alba. So in the app, you just come over to search and type in linea alba. Linea alba. And it'll just pop up there. And then you'll see that's that strong connective tissue line that goes right up the center line. So in Chinese medicine, this is the conception vessel. So this is a really, really important acupuncture meridian pathway that comes up the front of the body, supplying chi or energy or electrons to the connective tissue, to the body. So that's the linea alba. So your origin is linea alba via the rectus abdominis. So here we put in rectus abdominis. You can see it's going to connect into rectus abdominis here. So if we go back to the TVA, insertion linea alba, pubic crest. So this muscle's not stopping here. It goes right across to the linea alba. You can see from behind, it's sitting behind or underneath the rectus abdominis there. So what we have is this really interesting kind of line of fiber direction. So when you're trying to work out what movement's going to be generated when a muscle contracts, you look at the fiber orientation. So the fiber orientation here, we've got horizontal fibers, we've got oblique fibers going in a downward angle, we've got these ones here are still horizontal fibers here. But even these kind of oblique ones here, they're still oblique and horizontal. But if the whole muscle belly contracts as one, so all the levels of the spinal innervation get a signal to the muscle to contract, the whole muscle will contract as one unit. And so they're going to compress and contract in. So this is where the stabilization component of your transverse abdominis occurs. So it's going to, typically on your exhalation particularly, this will contract and it'll slide across a lot, but it's probably all going to be an isometric contraction versus a big sliding contraction. Whereas your rectus abdominis, the fibers are coming downward, so superior to inferior, this downward angle. So they're going to be pulling your trunk down this way, or you're going to pull your pelvis up this way, depending on your orientation and if you've got your feet anchored, or depending on the position that you start in. So you get basically transverse abdominis doing horizontal stabilization, and then you get rectus abdominis doing vertical superior stabilization and movement, because remember, a muscle it can contract eccentrically, so it can lengthen under load. It can contract concentrically, so it can shorten, or it can kind of contract and just hold, which we call isometric. So if you're doing a plank or a push-up, your rectus abdominis, your transverse abdominis are going to be contracting and stabilizing together as one big unit. And so you get front and side, and because that connects into your lower back, then you're going to get the things like the QLs, so the quadratus lumborum in, right, forum, we are QL. Move me out the way. There we are. There, QL in. So let's put the other side in so we can see it. Quadratus. I never learned how to type, so my spelling is crap because I can't type. That's what I tell myself anyway. Nope, wrong. Quadratus femoris. There we go. That's where. So here we have the quadratus lumborum as well. So when you are doing like a plank or a push-up, or you're stabilizing your spine, this muscle is going to contract as well. And so it's going to connect into the transverse abdominis, and then you've got your back expansors there as well. So essentially what you're going to get is up and down, side to side, lower back stabilized. And then if we put in the diaphragm, diaphragm. And you put in the diaphragm, so then you get this kind of superior stabilization as well. So a lot of people don't appreciate, or they haven't been taught or explained to them, that the diaphragm can become a primary stabilizer of the spine as well, because it physically attaches onto the spine. So we'll be doing a whole video on the diaphragm soon, so stay tuned for that one. And then of course you get the pelvic floor. So if we put in pelvic floor, and then you get the pelvic floor muscles as well. So this is really the core itself. So you have the pelvic floor muscles under here, this whole kind of unit of pelvic floor muscles. They're kind of stabilizing the pelvis from beneath. You have the abdominal unit, if you will. So you've got the six-pack, or rectus abdominis. You've got the transverse abdominis. We've also got the internal and external oblique. You have the lumbothoracic fascia, the quadratus lumborum, back extensors here as well, all stabilizing the spine. Then you have the diaphragm, which is a huge muscle, which will be stabilizing the spine as well. So what is really fascinating, or really cool to see, is that you can breathe, you can kind of have all these muscles contracted and stabilizing isometrically. So you've got a really strong, stiff spine, and you're still breathing in and out. This diaphragm is still going up and down, doming. And that in itself provides stability too. So when you inhale, air comes down into the lungs. So the lungs expand. So that expansion creates stability in the upper torso. The diaphragm pushes down, so it domes down. And then all your internal organs, your liver, your spleen, the kidneys, the intestines, large intestine, small intestines, bladder, they all get pushed downward, because the movement of the diaphragm when it contracts is, it's a couple centimeters. So you get a big downward movement. So all those organs then get kind of squished a little bit and pushed down inferiorly. And so that's where the pelvic floor comes in. It kind of like stabilizes underneath. So on the inspiration, you get a big downward push there. And to allow that to happen, these muscles typically lengthen eccentrically to allow that to happen. Okay, so they kind of dome and contract a little bit under load. And then on the exhalation, it all reverses. So then this muscle kind of contracts and comes together, and there's a lifting feeling. And then as that's happening, the abdominals are contracting, and that helps push the abdominal contents back up, and that helps with the relaxation of the diaphragm to dome back up. So then you get this kind of nice pump, if you will. So when you're breathing correctly, you're also creating this really amazing stabilization. You're massaging all the internal organs. That's because they're moving. And so all your organs, they've got ligaments and connective tissue that keep in place. So like any ligament connective tissue, if it doesn't move, it gets really stiff and stagnant. And so if organs get stuck, they might have a vessel or a structure that gets bound or twisted or blocked or adheres. And so whatever flow that needs to go through, there might be blood flow or lymphatic flow, gets impeded or restricted, and that can kind of create issues with the organs. So stability is also about breathing, and it's also about kind of circulation of blood and of lymph, particularly through the body, maintaining good structural integrity of all the organs and tissues. And the kind of key one is this transverse abdominus, because it's such a big muscle and it wraps from the front to the back. So it's essentially attaching indirectly onto your spine via the thoracolumbar fascia and the QL, right around to the linea alba, which is that ligament there. And then we may as well put in the obliques. So let's put in the internal oblique over here. Let's go left. So the internal oblique sits there on the left. And then we put in the external oblique. We'll put that one onto the right. So you get this really, really big abdominal unit. Okay. And these are all working together in coordination. And when you put all these muscles together, that gives us the 6 spinal movements that we can do. So we can do flexion, extension, lateral flexion, rotation, stiff bracing of the spine, or anti-rotation, where we're stopping the body from twisting. So all these muscles are integrated into those movements. And with human movement, you can be working in multiple planes, multiple levels, multiple positions at the same time, or you can move from one to the other. So for example, if you do like a downward facing dog, you're going from a plank, which is stiff, and then you're going up into, the down dog. So you're creating extension of the spine, and then you might come back down into chaturanga and then do spinal extension as you lift your chest up into like a back bend. And then you might roll up through the core, creating spinal flexion, bring your knees back down to the ground, and then you're basically in spinal flexion, and then kind of roll back up from spinal flexion onto your knees, and then you're moving through extension. So a yoga practice, if you've done it correctly following the movement, you can use your entire core muscles with yoga. And essentially the same thing with Pilates. And in the gym, you can do the same thing in the gym as well. It's just your understanding of how the body works. So, and we'll do a full video at some point on this kind of core structure and how it all works together in a bit more detail. Just today, I want to give you a nice little overview of the abdominal core, if you will. And it's all kind of supported or used by this TVA. Now, typically, because the TVA sits under like the rectus abdominis, the internal external oblique, you can't really palpate it. But you'll notice here on the internal obliques, there's a bit of a space there, which is just below your superior ASIS, anterior superior iliac spine. And typically your navel is going to be level with your ASIS, maybe a little bit lower or higher on the individual, but somewhere around this kind of region through here. Okay, so your ASIS is typically level with your navel, which is typically, depending on the person, usually around about L4 region. Okay, no, sorry, correction. it's the top of the iliac crest is more level with L4, L3, L4, which is generally where the center of gravity is, where your belly button is, and then your center of gravity is below that. So correction. Yeah. So if you go across from the iliac top of the crest, the iliac crest here, maybe go from behind, you can see it better. Yeah. Yeah, that typically lines up with L3, L4. Okay, and that's typically the pivot point, the axis point of the lower back. That's where most people hurt their lower back because that's where all the loading is going through typically. And then the navel is going to be just anterior to that. So level with here. And then your center of gravity typically sits a bit lower than that. And in Chinese medicine, that's called the dantian as well. That's where the energy center is in the dantian, which is concentration of mitochondria from your intestines, which is another video as well. Okay, so let's have a look at some movement of the transverse abdominis. So I'm going to get into the middle there. Let's go to motion. Okay, lateral trunk flexion. So we got side bending or lateral trunk flexion. If you go fatal, okay. So the muscle here, you can see goes right to the back onto where the QL is attaching on the transverse process of the lumbar spine. And as you're getting this kind of sideways movement and this kind of movement as well, it's going to kind of create or contribute to that lateral flexion. Now, if you put in the obliques and the QL, that's going to kind of create that movement too. You can see in here all the muscles that are involved in that movement. You've got the psoas kicking on too. So that's your lateral trunk flexion. And now we have just trunk flexion or your sit-up type shape. Okay, so when both sides, left and right, contract together with rectus abdominis, this is what you're going to look like. So you can see here, as you brace, the spine's going to start to flex a little bit. Okay, so you can kind of brace in different positions. So you can kind of come back here. So this is more you standing up straight. So if you brace and you exhale tension, these muscles will pull in a little bit. There's a feeling of them drawing in. Okay. And it's more just the muscles are kind of sliding across each other. So there's that cross bridging is going to create a little bit of that sensation of the tightening and pulling in. So often it's referred to as like a belt or a corset because when it all contracts, because it wraps around from front to back and the fibers are horizontal, as it contracts, it's doing this kind of thing. It's there. Now, where people go wrong is they try to suck in too much. So they try to pull in too much into the spine. So you don't need to do that. You just need to tension it. You just need to exhale and squeeze and create tension and maybe a little bit of a drawing. Now, people will often cue the navel or the belly button because it's an easy landmark. And so if you think about tensioning and then you'll feel the belly drawing in, okay, that means you're going to start to contract that. But you don't want to suck it in. You just want to like squeeze and you'll feel it just naturally pull in a little bit. But you don't want to like suck it all the way in. Now, the reason we don't want to suck it all the way in is because when you're breathing, the diaphragm's going to try to dome down. So if you inhale and draw that in at the same time, then the diaphragm won't have enough space to push down. So you can still breathe in. It's just you're not going to get a fuller breath. So you might take just like a little inhale to get some air into the lungs, but you're not going to take like a big inhale where you're going to get a real big expansion of the thorax or the rib cage. So there's always a trade-off between what we're doing. And there are some kind of like yoga techniques and qigong techniques we call reverse abdominal breathing. So typically on the inhale, as everything's expanding and the abdominals will be lengthening under eccentric loads to allow that diaphragm to dome down and to push the belly down. So typically on the inhale, the belly kind of gets pushed out a little bit. And on the exhale, the abdominals contract and they draw in and the diaphragm pushes back up. In reverse abdominal breathing, we do the opposite. So on the inhale, instead of drawing out, you draw in, and then on the exhale, you release. Okay, so the reason you do that is that pressure that you build up. So you inhale and you're like building up gas pressure, partial pressure of gases in the lungs, and that pressure creates heat and it's very stimulating to the nervous system. So it's an activating technique. So in things like bellows breath or reverse abdominal breathing, where you're doing a strong abdominal contractions, one reason why this is so energizing is because you're activating the nervous system, you're increasing respiratory rate, heart rate. These are all signals to the body to become alert for activity, but you're also increasing the gas pressure in the lungs. So it's like you're pumping up a balloon, more pressure, more pressure, more pressure. And so that pressure is going to create an effect in the body of being very stimulated. It's going to bring in heat because more heat, more pressure. And so that's going to kind of translate into the body. So that's why you do like these rapid abdominal contraction breathing, or one of the reasons when you're doing things like cold immersion. So you're creating this heat in the body to kind of like stave off the cold water, for example. So you can brace in any one of these positions here. So you can go into a full sit-up shape. Okay, typically the full sit-up's around about 30 degrees of spinal flexion. Okay, and here the abdominals are maximally contracted. And if you were to flip this into a push-up position or a plank position, we call that the hollowed out position, meaning that your spine is in this nice curve. It's in the hollowed out shape position, which gives you a really strong abdominal contraction. Okay, so you're really, really, really strong position. So you can do like a plank here and hold it maximally contracted, abs are on, spine is fully flexed, so it's very strong. But when you're at the end range of any joint, okay, it can be very strong in that position because the structure of the bones are in a shape where they're very stable. But also means then you can't move in the other direction. So you can see here that these joints here, the facet joints, they're kind of like fully closed down. So that means they're very stable. But if you try to turn or twist in that position, they've got nowhere to go. So they can't actually turn or twist. So like everything, there's a trade-off between stability and mobility. So the more mobile you are, the more space the joints typically have to move. Okay. The more stable you are, typically the joints are in like an end range position. So they're either in full extension or they're in fully extension or in full flexion. So the structure of the glute structure is really important. That kind of keeps it in position. So just something to think about. So there is no right or wrong position here, really. It just depends on the exercise you're executing or the position you're trying to do. In my opinion, you want to be strong in the full range. So you want to be strong here. You want to be strong right through to here. Okay. You want to be strong in standing. You want to be strong in a plank position. You want to be strong in anti-gravity, so back bending. You want to be strong in side bending. So there's a reason. Personally, I do 3 or 4 kind of like core yoga-esque Pilates type sessions a week for about 50 minutes, just purely for spinal and hip health. My other training involves daily Tai Chi or Qigong practice for my energy levels. I do 2 to 3 kind of low intensity, steady state cardio on a bike with high intensity training in there as well. And I'll cycle in weightlifting, maybe 2 sessions a week. And they can be combinations in various methods. So what I'm trying to do is have this really nice combination of a body that moves really well, has good stability, I have some strength, I have a good cardiovascular fitness, and I'm just trying to maintain those areas particularly. Okay, the last one we're looking at here is transverse abdominus, and we've got rotation. So here we're looking at the muscles pulling through. So we've got some of these oblique fibers here. So if you can kind of imagine this is contracting here, it's pulling on this tissue. So it's kind of pulling it across. And at the same time, you're going to get the obliques pulling across as well in conjunction with like the QL on the back here and the lats to kind of create that rotational movement. So this is really interesting. So if this part of the abdominal wall is contracting here, then this side has to relax. So you've got this fascinating kind of combination of, you've got two muscles, left and right, transverse abdominis. They're neurologically connected, so they can either fire together and create like the sit-up position, or one side can fire and creates twisting or side bending or rotation, which means the other side has to relax. So you get a neurological signal come around, which is called reciprocal inhibition, which tells this muscle to relax. So that's how you stretch properly, right? So if you want to stretch this muscle here, okay, what you want to do is actually contract this muscle and create the movement, hold that position there. Then if you breathe into this side of the rib cage, so you get the lung expansion, you will also then stretch out all this tissue here as well. And then on the exhalation, you really work on getting these muscles contracting, creating the last little bit of twist you can until you get your end range of movement. And then you're essentially going to stretch out your entire abdominal wall on that side effectively. Or probably more importantly for most people, it'll be the lower back. Okay. So when you know how to breathe correctly and move correctly, then your stretching becomes very, very functional. Stretching, not so much for flexibility, being able to like do the splits or anything, but just taking your joints through their full range of movement with control, using breathing and movement with respiration. So then you can get these abdominals working and get the movement of the full range. Because sometimes if a muscle is really tight, so for example, if this QL here is really, really tight and it's kind of holding this 12th rib down, and I'm trying to rotate this direction, okay, for that rotation to occur, this QL has to relax. If it's not relaxing, it won't allow that rotation to occur. So I might then have to rotate up a little bit higher and more into the kind of thoracic, or lower in more of the pelvis. And that's not ideal because thoracics don't have as much rotation as the lumbar. And so you're going to get excessive loading in other tissues and other structures. And that's where you get these kind of movement dysfunctions kind of created. And whenever tissue gets kind of stressed out beyond its capacity to kind of like deal with the force coming in, it gets fatigued, it gets worn down, and it can get irritated, it can get inflamed, and then long term you can kind of get repetitious kind of micro tearing and wearing of tissue, and then that's where you get like a tissue failure or an injury or something like that occurs. So we want to try to avoid that. Okay, so that's the transverse abdominis. Let's go back into the main diagram. Don't worry about this one here. Okay, so I highly recommend people learn how to breathe correctly, because if you learn how to breathe correctly, breathing is core training. So when you're doing your abdominal work, your core training, Pilates or yoga, honestly, if you take away from yoga all the kind of spiritual component of yoga and the kind of religious component of yoga, and you can just look at asana is just basically movement. Okay, so asana, when you put it next to like a good Pilates class or a good kind of functional movement gym program, it's essentially the same stuff, because movement is movement. Where Pilates and yoga is very different. Yoga has a whole culture, very rich cultural history, and asana movement is just one small component of the yoga practice. So a huge component of yoga, because it's a really holistic approach. It's mind, body, spirit. It is biopsychosocial. It's, as I call, the oldest self-developed program in the world that we know of, because it incorporates basically lifestyle, behavioral choices, your ethics, your values, your purpose, proper movement, pranayama, breathing, okay, meditation practices, and then how to integrate all that into your life in a meaningful way. Pilates is just functional rehabilitation. Comes out of, World War One internment camps, wounded soldiers, from Joseph Pilates. So it's very different. One's not better than the other, because you might do Pilates and you might have your own religious faith and you get purpose and meaning from other areas, which is totally cool. So it's no judgment one way or the other. It's just that's where the big difference is. And then same thing with Qigong and Tai Chi, and same thing with going to the gym. Like you might go to the gym, but you might have a strong religious practice or a spiritual practice as well, which you are integrating into your life in many various ways. The key kind of concept is that you're taking care of business at all levels. Physical level, breathing level, because breathing is chi or energy. Mental, emotional level, so managing your mind and your emotional states. Okay. Energy level, so managing your energy, really, really important. And then the deeper level is that kind of spiritual level, like your greater purpose and reason for existence and where you find meaning and what you do with your life, all that kind of stuff. That high connection. Okay. So you want to, in my humble opinion, you want to train and develop all 5 of those levels. Okay. How you do that, many methods, many paths, many approaches that you can do to achieve that. Okay. I think, and with that, let's leave today's discussion here on transverse abdominis. If you have any questions, thoughts, comments, leave them down in the comments. Love to reading them. If there's anything I missed that you think is really helpful, leave it down in the comments as well. I'm always still learning about this stuff. So yeah, let me know your thoughts. And our next video, I think we're going to look at the diaphragm. Yeah, let's do the diaphragm because we've done all the abdominal muscles now. Now we can do the diaphragm. One of my favorite muscles. I'm a total breathing nerd. Currently doing my PhD in breathing and respiration stuff, which I'll be doing videos of in the future as well. So until then, stay tuned, stay healthy, breathe, stay curious, humble, and have an amazing day. Ciao.